Thanks to IFP, thanks to all of you for coming out Thursday afternoon. I know it's been a grueling week of meetings for you, and we're going to do our best to not talk any business up here on stage. We're only going to talk about ideas. So I was thinking about this panel and how we might launch into it. And I remembered this moment that happened to me a few weeks ago. I'm a poker player, and so I'm sitting at this poker table, and when I play poker, it's usually with sort of anonymous, groups of guys in someone's house or something, and we don't really have a lot of engagement about ideas. And I'm sitting there, and this guy turns to me, and he's like, you do that festival, right? And I was like, yeah, I do. And he said, well, okay, you got to have seen this movie, right? You've seen this movie, Snow on the Bluff, right? And I was like, well, I've heard of it, I haven't seen it yet. And he's like, well, is that real? I was like, I don't know. And he's like, I think it's real, but I'm not sure if it's real. I think it's got to be real, but how did they get that stuff? So this is a moment where a film, which is neither entirely fiction nor entirely nonfiction, somehow finds its way into the most mainstream consciousness. And these poker players in Columbia, Missouri are now thinking about the very things we're going to sit up here and talk about today, which I thought was pretty cool. So everyone's names and films are on the screen. We can all see them. We don't have to read them out. And so we're just going to jump in. And I want you to each talk a little bit about your film, when you started the film, where you were in terms of thinking about it as nonfiction or fiction, and then what that journey took you on, and kind of where you think about it now.
My name is Lotfi Nathan. I'm the director of 12 O'Clock Boys. The movie is about a young boy named Pug, who you meet when he's about to turn 13, growing up in West Baltimore, who's aspiring to join an illegal dirt bike gang, which call themselves the 12 O'Clock Boys. So I started with the ambition, not even really of making a documentary, certainly nonfiction, but just sort of a short documentary. Yeah, that's the plan.
Hi, I'm Lynn Sachs, and I made Your Day Is My Night. And this is the first time I've been asked to address this exact issue, so it's very interesting. You're seeing all of us develop a way of articulating that shift when we went from something being of a particular kind of thing to something much more ambiguous. So I suppose what happened for me was I had started out making a documentary about a group of people who lived in a shift bed house, which is a shared apartment. Usually it's immigrants, people who don't have access to a lot of money, and sometimes they work in the day and sometimes they work at night, and they share this very communal space, usually with bunk beds and that kind of thing. So I thought I would make a documentary, but I couldn't get my proverbial documentarian's foot in the door. So then I thought I would invent the whole thing, a fiction film, and I started to look for people in Chinatown to be in my film. And lo and behold, the people who auditioned for my fiction film actually lived in shift bed houses. So it all kind of went in a circle. But then I was still kind of making a documentary, but I realized that as the people were standing in front of my camera and we were doing interviews, there was this artificiality to it because they were performing their lives. And instead of seeing that as a limitation, I decided to push the idea of performing their lives into a performance. So we did a series of about 4 different versions of live performances with excerpts from the film, and then those live performances made their way into the film. So it became a very collaborative project.
Wow, it's better than the normal iPhone ringtone, I'll give you that.
He asked me to repeat the end. It became very collaborative because it wasn't that I have subjects. I have people who were in the film who are also my collaborators.
My name is Tim Sutton, and I'm the director of Pavilion. I originally wanted to make a film just about youth in general, but it started off for the idea a long time ago. A kid I knew was riding a skateboard in the small town upstate, riding a skateboard home from washing dishes at the local restaurant down to a 4th of July carnival. and he never made it there, and they found him in the bottom of the lake. And it tore the town apart, tore his family apart, and it really was just a huge open wound that years later I was like, this is the film that I wanted to explore, and I knew the family well, and I started exploring that, and then I realized that what I was really interested in was what his friends would do without him, what the absence of him would be for these kids to spend the summer, because these kids we all just go on with our lives. Like literally the day after someone dies, you still have to live. And then I realized that what I really wanted to do is just make that movie about youth, make it not about loss or about absence, but just about how kids live their lives during the summer with this kind of like endless, aimless, like dreaminess. And so I always approached it as a dramatic film. I still think of it as a narrative film, and I just, working with non-actors, feel like you have to approach the film a certain way, and that's using a type of documentary aesthetic.
But real quick before we jump on, because I want to kind of call you on that, because we were just talking about these two moments in the film where there are intentional either nods to nonfiction or sort of a suggestion that we might be in that. One in particular where a character reaches up and you can see the sort of mic pack on him, which would never happen in a fiction film. That's where you're used to it. So you made those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy cinema that is complex and confusing, and you're not on solid ground, possibly ever. And that is not always the best way to approach an American mainstream audience. But I will say it's important to me to always to always keep the audience in a question. And so when certain things, we were shooting a certain scene, and that was like, oh, you guys are playing dart guns with each other. Let's see what happens. And some kid got hit in the face, and I cut out the scene where the camera lurches across the boom that's holding like this, and the kid kind of gets up, and we're really nervous because the kid has been hit in the eye, and I'm thinking, I blinded the child, you know? And we let it go, and we let it go, and we let it go, and he says, oh, fuck, and when he lifts up to rub his eye, his audio pack shows on his waist, and it's a really interesting thing because for the first time you're thinking, my God, I'm watching a documentary, I'm completely confused. And then right after that, you're brought into this long tracking shot that there is absolutely no way it could be a documentary. And so to me, it was really creating this landscape of constantly wondering about these kids. Is it real? Is it not? Or does it matter at all? He was fine.
Damon.
My name is Damon Russell. I directed the film Snow on the Bluff, which is about this crack dealer and robbery boy in West Atlanta. And I'm from Atlanta, so I knew I wanted to make a film about this type of kid. And so it's hard to explain whether we never really approach it as this document. What do we just filmed like the most interesting stuff we could find or think of, and we just didn't put a lot of thought into it because I think we were making a film just solely to give out to other drug dealers, and I thought only people like that would ever see this film, so we never put any thought into making it into a film.
And I mean, with that strategy in mind, I mean, did you ever think like, oh, do the other drug dealers care if this is more fiction or more nonfiction? Are they going to be able to tell the difference? Like,
well, no, we just wanted to do whatever was like the most authentic thing that, no one would ever question was real.
I think, so working our way back down. In the case of your film in particular, Damon, like you've, like that poker player in Missouri, a lot of people and a lot of the interest in the film has come around people kind of questioning it. And even in a world where, people have seen Blair Witch, there's still this sense of authenticity in the footage. How have you kind of like been forced to react to that or engage with that? And has that discussion kind of like ever been in a place that you were less happy about this discussion being or more happy? Has it been like a good thing for the film?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, we, for legal reasons, myself and the star, we just decided, okay, no matter what, we can never tell people what's real and what's not, because we did get questioned by the police. They got like an early copy of the film, and they thought that some stuff in it was real, and it was. But I mean, that's beside the point. But we were just like, it'll be safer for us if we just never, because there's a lot of people who could get in trouble if, just to kind of protect that. And then so people inevitably like go back and forth saying this is real, this is not, and it's fun. And then like we just make up different lies every time we're questioned about it.
Actually, I kind of see that in a way as a thread. I haven't seen the other films, but from what you've talked about, that some of the people in our films could get in trouble. And by leaving that ambiguity, and not grounding it in a commitment to the truth, we liberate them, and we also liberate the form of the film and the exploration, because nobody will call us on what is the truth.
Lafa, you want to talk about that a bit in terms of your film and that risk? And I remember we saw each other kind of right before, as you were getting ready for the Baltimore premiere, and kind of wondering whether people would be arrested at the premiere or what might happen.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, that oftentimes there's some crime involved that is sort of palatable for an audience at the same time, because you're playing with maybe a controversial story, but it needs to be something kind of enticing, right? So it's not deplorable that you're even going into story scenarios with these people. But yeah, like you were saying, leading up to our Baltimore premiere, I was concerned that the police would construe the film as a sort of promotion, that we were sensationalizing the group, because it does take a lot of artistic license, I think, and goes into the thinking of a kid who wants to join this criminal group. And there's music, and there's sort of packaged high-octane situations, that I wanted to be entertaining, so. But luckily, the local media, the local news, newspapers, radio, were interested in having a conversation about it leading up to the Maryland Film Festival. So I think that kind of set the stage for it to be something to consider, rather than this kind of punk piece.
In other projects you all have had, do you feel like you approach every project with a kind of like, do I start this as doc, do I start this as fiction? Or what tips you off to a place where you think, okay, now these are the strategies I might employ? I mean, we just talked about sort of risk, about sort of crime and risk, and that being, one set of things in which, this strategy makes more sense. Are there other indicators for you? Are there ideas for you, creative ideas that you think, okay, well, this makes, this is going to push me in this direction?
Sorry, just to continue. I would like to get a lot more involved personally in kind of controlling stories in the future with projects. I mean, I think I started 12 O'Clock Boys kind of passive, as just a kind of casual observer, but at the end of it, I was into making it into a more cohesive film, and I don't have any problem with steering that, and I think that it's what audiences want. They want things to be entertaining and rounded. So I think as long as you're comfortable with your position and how close you are with those subjects, it's not a problem. And I do think that audiences can read that if it's a genuine piece. The meaning will show through anyway. But for next project, I would like to kind of coax the whole thing.
I'm actually much more interested in projects where I don't have control, because I think that's what is interesting about working in the documentary realm, that it has to stay continuously surprising. I kind of think each thematic or community with which we engage, or any situation, the moment and the project speaks back to us and determines the form of the film. So I kind of like it when it starts to show me, to reveal things about what's happening, and all of a sudden, all the struggle and difficulty of really conceptualizing the piece comes through by the moment. So it's just interesting, because I wouldn't say I'm a film director, I say I'm a filmmaker, so I make it with the situation.
I'm not a documentary filmmaker at all. I'm a narrative filmmaker. I just don't believe in scripts. I think if I could write like Paul Schrader, I'd probably like believe in scripts, but I think that scripts are a way of killing a film before it gets made. And so, one of the things I do is to get financing, is to work on a story and really clarify and create a story that has dialogue and that has, I guess you could call them plot points, and that has an arc. And then, my goal is to then not worry about that script, and to develop the film and be surprised, and to go with those surprises, and to learn from those surprises, and to revamp your plan on a daily basis, and make something that's that someone just said about a film about Pavilion. They called it liquid, and that to me was like the greatest compliment in the world, because I'm interested in control, but I'm only interested in control so I can continue to kind of redefine that control and share that control with the situation at hand.
And have you worked with trained actors and non-actors?
I haven't made a feature film with trained actors, and the non-actors, asking non-actors to be actors is I feel defeats its own purpose, and also would take, I think, years to develop the right rapport, and you can't really do that on a micro budget, and you can't really do that in various situations. I think fantastic movie Ballast is a fantastic movie where there's lots of video documentary of the rehearsals they did, and it took a long time. He went to the Delta all the time, and I feel like that movie is a masterpiece. I had to make Pavilion in 10 days, and so for me it was about telling them nothing. I tried to show the kids the story. They had no interest. They wanted to make a movie. They did not want to read my story, and thank God, So it was really about just continuing the creative process with the collaborators and going forward at all costs. Everything was a victory. Anything could go, because I didn't have a story that was like, I've got to get to page 12 where the gun is revealed. Even if that was in the story, it was like, that's not interesting to me. What's interesting to me is when you're on page 12, what is page 12? Does that make sense?
More or less, I think.
That's where I am.
No, I can relate to this idea of not using a script or not forcing a story on what you're shooting. I think it's just more interesting when the characters sort of drive what the next plot point or whatever would be. Like, it kind of like when it just naturally happens. It's just feels better.
So one of the things, coming back a little bit, one of the things we talked about, specifically in three of the films really, this idea of crime and kind of what the stakes were for those characters. But I'm really curious, and I've been thinking recently more in the nonfiction world about stakes when it comes to a certain story, and whether some stories demand more journalistic practices, whether some stories, how one builds uses the tools of what I would say of creative nonfiction, the tools of filmmaking really, in the service of stories which maybe have higher stakes, have geopolitical stakes, have whatever. Are there? Is that a concern for you? Do you think like I make a decision and this kid looks better in the film, we don't see this kid do something in the film that would make people not like him, or be a crime? How are we putting our characters on screen?
Yeah, I do think that it's different if you're dealing with, as you put it, geopolitical issue or something that is where that it should really be reported more than made into a film. That the importance is really purely the subject matter. I would be annoyed if that was done in this really impressionistic way, and you wanted to hear exactly what a person had to say, and it shouldn't be muddied. I'm just trying to think of instances with that. Can you guys think of anything where?
Well, look, I mean,
Well,
for
like
example,
the Snowden thing we were talking about, for example, right?
Right.
What's her name?
Laura Poitras.
Right.
Even, yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, you know, Laura's case certainly, but even that example, let's say, of a film about soldiers, right? If we look at, you know, of the many films we've, you know, that have come out, a film about soldiers in Afghanistan, and, you know, when you guys choose to reveal or not reveal something about your main character that may make us like them or not like them, that's something. Do we expect that same kind of creative decision making when we see the story of the soldiers, and does it change how we think about them in terms of, you know, how they're carrying out their mission?
I think one of the things that perhaps all of us share is that the people who are in our films actually took a risk by being in the film. Maybe it's a creative risk, or maybe it's a risk because they've done something that's not legal, and they're opening up to us, and that is that's, as you said, a stake that they're taking. But one of the things that I think is a determining factor that sort of sets this kind of work apart is we aren't choosing people to be in our films because they're necessarily great actors or known as actors, because I sometimes think that's using people like props, but we're using people because they have something interesting to say, or they're very charismatic, and that kind of moves it into that actorly realm. They have a presence on screen. So when I was working with the people in my film, I actually asked, I went to a large group of people, mostly seniors in Chinatown, and honestly, I called it an audition. And it turned into an interview. So that's because I'm comfortable with interviews, but in a way, when every time you make a documentary, you're actually also auditioning. You're looking for someone who will move your story, who has been through an experience that's going to charge the situation and the whole film. So you have a way of assessing who those people are on two levels, which is kind of problematic and a bit exploitive, but that's what it is.
But with documentaries, I think everyone does a kind of casting, right?
Yeah.
Right through when we were at IFP with 12 O'Clock Boys, I remember the meetings we had and conversations. People were sizing up the subject who becomes who never called I never called Pug a subject until you were in this kind of setting, you know, or character or something like that. But I mean, I think it just happens across the board.
Yeah, I kind of come into this. I used to shoot like a lot of reality TV, and it's just pretty much like as evil as people imagine it, as far as like the decisions you make about people and what you're gonna show and stuff like that. So I've kind of already like don't have a soul in a way. Like just I'll make a decision based on making the film the most interesting, and you know hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I'm serving the story. So the story to me, because I feel I can take any liberty I want. And when we were going to Arizona, I knew that I wanted the film to lose interest in the main character, and just kind of like any person who is a new kid, he's kind of he's alone, and he's popular, and then he's just one of the regular people. And I wanted the film to drift away from him, but I knew I had to find the person that it would drift away to. And so that was all based on charisma. That was based on who we found, and in terms of opening up the film to a brand new, like, kind of dark hole, this kid just took it to a whole new level. So it was luck, but we were looking for charisma, you know.
And on what you were saying earlier, Tim, the concept of working with non-actors, you know, I think that the hybrid space, or whatever you want to call it, is exciting because you don't have to deal with bad actors per se, you know, because I feel like either working with a non-actor or working with great actors is great, but bad actors for me is really scary, you know, like I feel like that's why so many independent narrative films I'm not into, because of the acting is just so uncomfortable. And you know, like even like amateur actors in real life, you know.
But I wanted to go to this question of serving the story, or if you say serving the art. And I think that really takes what we're doing to a very different place from what many, many documentary filmmakers are doing, and they're looking for serving the truth and revealing something about the way the world works and maybe trying to change the world. And so I have found, I finished my film in February, but I found that sometimes by claiming the hybridity of it, then it allows the audience to question the integrity of it, because they don't know where they are in relationship to what you're trying to manifest to them. To what extent do they get involved if they don't know where the truth is?
Well, so that brings up a question is, what have been the expectations people have put on you in your films? And have you received sort of criticism, or people who wanting your film to be something, wanting your film to expose a certain social injustice, wanting your film to change the world in some way? And how have you dealt with that? How have you responded to that? Would you just say, I'm a filmmaker, and throw up your hands? Or
well, I mean, in my case is slightly different. I think people, when it premiered at South by Southwest, I was out in the lobby of the second screening, and this guy walked out, and he was mumbling, "No plot, no plot," and walked away. And I was, I was so insecure at that point. I was like,
the mumbling critics are the worst.
The mumbling critics. No, but that's the great thing about the movie to me, and I'm not saying that because I think I'm great. I'm saying that's the great thing about the movie, is that people call it non-narrative, which I don't believe there's such a thing as non-narrative. It's just a different kind of narrative, and people go in expecting this indie film to be this coming-of-age film that's like, and then he hugs his dad at the end, and they go out for ice cream, and that is bullshit. And so what I really wanted to do was create the world of these kids, not a story and not a plot, but the world. So you can watch this film 3 times and just sit there and think about things, and think about your life, and think about their lives, and think about when you were a kid or your kids' lives. And so for me, the expectations of like telling an indie film story is still, like to this day, people are like, the narrative was very thin. And I'm like,
that's
yeah.
what Liquid is, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh. But so for me, the expectations are not necessarily to uncover some great truth like a documentary or something, but just to adhere to rules that are in place.
I'll take a quick moment to make a plea for the death of the word narrative in connection only to fiction filmmaking. Having said that, a thin narrative or no narrative is fine, but the sort of idea that we make either documentaries or narratives seems bogus. Movies have narratives. Thanks. But Damon, you must have had, people in Atlanta who said, this is a poor representation of Atlanta, this is a poor representation of our neighborhood. Anything like that? No? Would they love it?
My dad didn't like it. He thought it misrepresented or told negative stories about black people, and he just thought he couldn't understand why I wouldn't make a movie with like dancing girls and like fast cars. He just didn't get it. But no, people like it is what it is. I don't know. I never really thought about that. It was a good question.
We have a few minutes. Do we have you have a question? Okay. Oh, I have 10 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
I'm very curious, Tim in particular, because you identify yourself as, and I'll use the word, a narrative filmmaker.
You can say fiction. Sorry.
Fiction filmmaker. I agree, it's all narrative. But I would like to know the reality of your shoot. You get there and you have these kids. Do you set up any kind of framework for them? How do you work?
Every shot, every scene in Pavilion, and also the movie I just recently finished called Memphis, every shot is set up completely by design. There's not anything that happens just because we found it. What happens is I will set up a frame with my cinematographer. We'll create like the plan, what we're trying to get out of the scene. And then I tell the kids in this case, okay, you're gonna go over to that tree, you're gonna find a sledgehammer, and you're gonna pretend like you're gonna hit the other kid with it. Go. So, and then how they do it is up to them. And I rarely do a second take. I never do a third take. And so we go through that, and then there are times where something will happen in one scene that'll be like, ooh, that's interesting, and we'll think about how to develop that on 3 scenes from now.
And you're all nodding, so you all do it that way? No, you're shaking. So how do you do it?
I don't know. If not, I don't do like sort of. I haven't done a stage sort of like
Mine's all
fully
stage.
fictional. You said you don't write a script, but you have like a story in mind when you're going in, so it's a different process.
Is there any moment in 12 O'Clock Boys where you told somebody to repeat an action or to stand somewhere so you could get the shot
Definitely.
right?
Yeah. But it was retroactive. You know, like.
Just for the camera.
Something would happen, and then you
Yeah,
said,
yeah,
let's
yeah.
do this again.
Do it again.
So what I did was I did long interviews, and through the interviews I discovered material that worked for my film. The theme of the film had a lot of it had to do with beds and the sort of the stake that you have in your own home, your own space and your privacy and intimacy and the release of sort of your place in a public sphere as you go into your domestic sphere, but then that's public too, and all of those things. But so I did these long interviews, and then what I did was I transcribed them, and then I created a distillation of those that was basically a script. And then the people performed their own lot. They performed their story, and they could improvise it as much as possible, and we did many takes. And so they actually kind of memorized it and then invented as they were going. But it was all documentary material. And I'd never worked that way before, but it was actually really fun and somewhat, I'll say it allowed me to break away from talking heads because, I didn't have to wait to see, well, what is she going to say? And let's let this keep going, because I knew once we were shooting it for the film where we were going.
And will you work that way again?
Actually, yeah, I just wrote a proposal for a new film because I really liked working that way and I want to push it some more.
It's interesting to hear everybody because it's like, I think that's what's exciting about the genre is that there's no, I mean, the way you guys are describing how you work, it's like I think I kind of do pieces of that, but there's like, you can approach every scene in sort of a different way, and it's fascinating because there's no rules. It's not like a narrative film where you got to get coverage, you got to get the reverse. It's not like documentary where you're sitting around waiting for something to happen. It's just you just do what you want to do. But one thing that, like you're saying about the first and second take, one thing I learned kind of from the star of my film is like he hated doing any second takes, and he would like yell at people and threaten them if we were forced to do a second take. And his philosophy, which I really liked, is he was like, if you don't give everything to this first take, then just you're not in the movie anymore. Like it was kind of his, and it worked. It was just like, yeah, let's just everybody just do it right the first time.
David, was a lot of pressure.
Was there one thing I really like about the film is that you never let go of your conceit, right? Like we've seen a lot of other kind of found footage films or kind of similar films where at some point there's a break, right? And the director can't help but kind of start framing things in a more traditional way. Was that tough for you? I mean, was there a moment where you're like, oh, I really want to kind of like do this part differently, or I'd like to kind of sum up the story in this other way, or you just knew from the beginning, like, we're going to jump into the story like this, we're going to get out of the story like this, and...
No, I mean, in a way, it was kind of like documentary in that we had like so many different scenes to choose from. In the end, like the editing process, you kind of make those choices. But during the shooting/writing process, we just go for it, you know.
But what does that mean? I mean, when you showed up at the set, what did you do?
Well, like, it was so dictated by what happens. Like, I show up one day, Frank, he got stabbed. Okay, cool, where's he at? He was up at the ambulance just took him away. We gotta run up there. We run up there, we start filming. Frank just got stabbed. And then we might need to film something later to kind of explain. I don't know. You just keep going.
We're gonna take a question over there.
Yeah, so this is Chris from the Atlanta Film Festival, Snow on the Bluff. Hey, Damon, how's it going? Can you, but going back real quick to the question about reaction and also the earlier question about what's at stake for playing with this form. Can you describe to them what happened on the first screening at the festival, if you remember?
Oh yeah, that's true, because you did ask that question. I did. When there's a scene in my movie where Curtis is the main guy, and he's like sitting at the kitchen table. He just cooked up a bunch of crack, and he's cutting it up and bagging it. And his 3-year-old son is sitting next to him, playing with his balloon and like kind of like pushing the crack around. And this guy got up. He was so offended. He was like, "I can't believe you would like present our people in this way." And then I was like, could you please sit down? And then the people who were in the movie heard me talking, and they stood up, and then there was a massive like fight kind of thing. And then so like
Thanks for prodding that answer, which clearly he ducked earlier. So
It got real.
And I was so pissed because like I felt like I took so much time and effort to make the film, and then halfway through, everyone like walks out because they had to run away from the cops before the cops got there, and then other people were scared because they thought there was going to be a shooting.
Now I wanted to bring that up because there's danger for them. There's a risk that they take, and it's the more closer it is to these people's lives, and which in Damon's case, while there is fiction, there were things that were created. It was still always emotionally true. There was always things that they experienced. So the situations, even if they were created, were real for them, or have been, even if they weren't necessarily right in front of camera. And so if people are taking it as narrative and reacting to it as such, lightly, but it's actually very real for these people. There's a real risk there. So there's a lot at stake.
I think the reaction is, like you were saying, you felt frustrated because you put all this thoughtfulness and energy into making it, an honest portrait. But, the accountability and the reaction, obviously, you get hit with after the fact. I wasn't really prepared for any of the, the audience responses and all of that. There's a lot of questions of exploitation and stuff like that I didn't really think of while I was making the 12 O'Clock Boys, and I think that's in my defense. I don't want to just throw my hands up and say I was just trying to make just making a movie. Leave me alone. But at the same time, if you're not really so concerned with that because you have close relationships with the people you're working with, then it can be really difficult to be confronted about that after the fact, by this this person who looks like they have some Midwestern guilt complex in the audience, it's like, what are you doing, for edifying the black community, or something like that. I've just I've been trying this year in these Q&As to be, to give thoughtful answers, but I'm starting to get sort of, impatient with those kind of questions.
Question over here.
I apologize. I'm going to make it a little bit business. But, so I really appreciate that you guys sort of proclaim that you don't care if it's documentary fiction. We have a similar type thing on our film. But I'm wondering, when you get to the festivals and you got a few places like True False that are accepting of that, but others aren't, did you guys run into a lot of problems with that? And ultimately, what did it mean? Did it mean you had to make a very strong decision that you were going to market yourself a certain way? Or did you allow it to be how you see it, which is sort of just a film?
Yeah, it's a fair question. When for every festival, maybe other than ours, you're going to check a box that says, documentary fiction. How did you guys approach that?
I usually say I make experimental documentaries, and strangely enough, with this film, it's won awards at several different film festivals. One was a documentary award, one was a Best Narrative Award, and one was a Best Experimental Award. So, you never know. I just thought this is the audience to share that with.
I think in a year that one of those boxes will have a new word. Yeah. Most likely. Because of panels like this, because of True False, but because of the we're not the four only filmmakers who are doing things like this, and the more people are making films, the more I think it'll be recognized as a different kind of genre. But I just put it docudrama just for fun. They're gonna like they're gonna accept your film if they like your film. I think the quality film festivals are looking for good films, no matter what they are.
That's a great end point. We've got to wrap this up. I want to thank you all. Really good discussion. I'm sure they're willing to hang out and talk more.